I want to note before I go through what the president is saying that we, the press corps here at the White House, have not had the chance to actually question the president in over 2 weeks. He has not taken questions from us. He didn't yesterday. They didn't even hold a press conference with the Mexican president, which is typically what they do in a foreign leader visits. But he is tweeting, and he's tweeting a lot. And he just fired off a huge threat. And basically, to sum it up, he is complaining that people are going after him in his view, but not going after his political opponents. This is something he's complained about for a long time now with the FBI, with the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is obviously Republican controlled. And that is what he's saying now. He's saying, you know, he's accusing Barack Obama and Joe Biden of crimes. He's saying that no Republican Senate Judiciary response, no justice, no FBI, no nothing. So basically, he is complaining because he feels like he is being unfairly targeted, something that, of course, has been a theme of his entire administration. But then he goes on and says this is prosecutorial misconduct. He says, we catch the other side spying on my campaign, the biggest political crime in history, and nothing happens. And then he talks about his achievements so far in office. So clearly the president is not happy with this, even though you heard how Jeffrey is framing this as a win for the president because it's unlikely that anyone's actually going to see his financial records before voters go to the...
But the bigger news is even more significant. The Supreme Court has rejected Donald Trump's last-ditch effort to keep his Deutsche Bank records sealed, meaning those documents are now publicly accessible. Critics reviewing the newly unsealed records claim they raise serious questions about Trump's long-standing financial ties, including allegations of money laundering involving Russian oligarchs and the alleged movement of roughly $30 million through a shell company that investigators say was linked to Jeffrey Epstein. The decision was handed down at 11 a.m. on January 4, 2026, in a narrow 5-4 vote, with Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Barrett joining the 3 liberal justices to deny Trump's request. In doing so, the court pointed back to its earlier rulings on Trump's tax returns, reaffirming that a president does not have blanket immunity from financial scrutiny. Legal experts note that this falls squarely under emoluments and financial oversight principles, which are designed to prevent presidents from shielding potential financial misconduct behind claims of executive privilege. The Deutsche Bank files, originally subpoenaed in 2019 and only now unsealed, are being described by some analysts as evidence that could fuel what they believe may become one of the most consequential corruption investigations in modern American history.
He will be able to hide his tax returns, unlike any other presidential candidate in the modern era, for one more election. And that is a victory for him. And even if he's not expressing happiness about it, it's still a victory.
If we could just take a step back for one moment, Jeffrey Toobin, and what you think these two decisions say about the court, the high court as it stands now, that the president has worked so hard to shape.
He needs some more appointments if he wants the extremely conservative court that a lot of his supporters want.
But his appointments didn't side with him here.
Well, they didn't side with him in these case on this.
On top of that, the suspicious activity reports filed by Deutsche Bank have painted an alarming picture, with internal compliance documents reportedly describing the Trump organization as being linked to transactions resembling Russian mirror trades. According to these records, Deutsche Bank's own compliance team raised repeated concerns that Trump-linked accounts were being used in ways consistent with money laundering, concerns that were formally documented rather than treated as speculation. Despite these internal warnings, the bank approved more than $2.5 billion in loans, a decision critics say reflected what compliance officers described as willful blindness to the questionable origins of certain funds. Reports further allege that senior bank officials, including relationship manager Rosemary Vrablic, continued approving loans even after federal authorities, including the FBI, flagged suspicious activity. Investigators and analysts argue that Deutsche Bank knowingly ignored these red flags because Trump was viewed as a highly valuable client, a choice that has since become central to accusations that the bank facilitated illicit financial activity. With these records now unsealed, supporters of the investigation say the documentation is extensive, detailed, and likely to play a major role in what could become one of the most serious financial scandals tied to a U.S. political figure. And to top it all off, the alleged connection to Jeffrey Epstein adds even more fuel to an already explosive situation. Documents cited by investigators reportedly show a flight manifest that closely aligns with a $30 million wire transfer from Mar-a-Lago to a shell company, identified only as J, occurring during the same week Trump was flying on Epstein's private jet, infamously known as the Lolita Express. Analysts reviewing these records argue that this overlap raises serious questions, particularly because the funds are alleged to have been routed through shell companies linked to Epstein, suggesting more than casual or social contact. According to these interpretations, the financial trail indicates Trump may have had direct monetary dealings with Epstein, with the structure of the transfers designed to obscure their true destination. While the documents do not explicitly state the purpose of the $30 million, critics point to the timing, secrecy, and shell company framework as evidence that the transaction was unlikely to involve legitimate business activity. They argue that moving such a large sum through opaque channels to an individual later convicted of sex trafficking is deeply troubling and demands further scrutiny, even as key questions about intent and purpose remain unanswered. Meanwhile, House Oversight Committee Chair Rana is holding a live hearing that he has described as the largest corruption exposure since the Teapot Dome scandal of the 1920s, an event long considered a defining symbol of political corruption in U.S. history, arguing that this case may be even more serious. According to statements made during the hearing, the allegations involve Russian money laundering, Epstein-linked shell companies, and more than $2.5 billion in questionable loans, all of which are now being examined publicly as Trump's financial dealings are laid out in detail. Members of Congress are presenting documents on screen, reading internal bank warnings into the record, and tracing the flow of money step by step, framing the process as a permanent historical record. The Deutsche Bank files under review reportedly span Trump's entire relationship with the bank, from the 1990s through his second term, and include loan applications, internal memos, compliance reports, wire transfer records, and correspondence among bank officials. Analysts reviewing the material argue it depicts a client who, under normal banking standards, would not have qualified for repeated loans, yet continued receiving them because of the business he brought in and the bank's willingness to overlook repeated red flags. The most concerning documents discussed are the suspicious activity reports, mandatory filings banks submit when transactions suggest possible money laundering or fraud, which Deutsche Bank compliance officers reportedly filed between 2016 and 2020 after reviewing accounts linked to Trump and Kushner. These reports cited patterns such as large wire transfers connected to Russian entities, transactions structured to evade reporting thresholds, and round dollar transfers consistent with laundering techniques, with the timing aligning with known Russian mirror trading schemes, leading compliance staff to conclude that Trump-related entities were being used as pass-throughs for Russian funds. Essentially described by investigators as functioning like a vehicle for money laundering, one of the most striking details raised during the review of the records is the reported $425 million bailout tied to Jared Kushner, which came amid significant financial distress for the Kushner family business. In 2018, the company was reportedly nearing bankruptcy following a failed real estate investment on 66th Avenue, when an unexpected infusion of funds arrived from sources that were never fully explained at the time. According to Deutsche Bank records cited by analysts, this bailout is alleged to be connected to the same suspicious Russian-linked money flows that had already triggered red flags in Trump-related accounts, leading critics to argue that Kushner's finances were rescued by funds moving through the same questionable channels. This has drawn heightened scrutiny because Kushner was serving as a senior White House advisor at the time, raising concerns about a close presidential relative relying on money alleged to have been laundered through Deutsche Bank by Russian oligarchs. The records also place renewed focus on Rosemary Vrablic, Trump's private banker at Deutsche Bank, whose role now appears central to the controversy. According to internal documents, she approved loans and managed Trump's accounts even after the FBI reportedly warned the bank about suspicious activity tied to Trump-related transactions, a decision investigators say ran counter to standard banking policies and compliance practices. Investigators argue that what emerges from the records looks less like institutional error and more like an individual decision to continue servicing a powerful client while disregarding federal warnings. After leaving Deutsche Bank in 2021 under circumstances now described as questionable, Rosemary Vrablic is reportedly facing scrutiny and potentially criminal exposure for her alleged role in allowing suspicious financial activity to continue. Among the most eye-catching transactions cited is a $30 million wire transfer to a shell company allegedly linked to Jeffrey Epstein, a transfer whose timing reportedly aligns with flight logs showing Trump aboard Epstein's private jet, the so-called Lolita Express. Analysts reviewing the structure of the shell company say it appears designed to obscure the ultimate recipient of the funds, and they note that a $30 million transfer does not correspond to any documented legitimate business relationship between Trump and Epstein. While the records do not specify what the payment was for, investigators argue that the amount, secrecy, and timing suggest it was meant to remain hidden. As authorities now trace where that money ultimately went, they are also examining broader evidence of Trump's ties to Epstein, including reported multiple flights between 1993 and 1997, and testimony suggesting Trump may have met Melania through Epstein's social circle. Taken together, investigators say the travel records, financial transfers, and witness accounts point to a relationship far deeper than Trump has publicly acknowledged, one that appears to extend beyond social overlap into sustained financial entanglement, even as key details remain under investigation. The recent Supreme Court ruling, decided by a narrow 5-4 vote, continues the pattern of earlier rejections of Trump's legal arguments, with Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Barrett once again joining the court's liberal justices to deny his claims. In its reasoning, the court pointed back to its 2022 decision allowing Trump's tax returns to be turned over to Congress, reaffirming that there is no absolute presidential immunity when it comes to financial scrutiny. The justices also rejected Trump's assertion that investigations into alleged financial misconduct are shielded by executive privilege, making clear that presidents can be investigated for accepting foreign money in ways that may violate the Constitution. Legal analysts say the ruling establishes a precedent designed to prevent future presidents from using claims of privilege to conceal potential financial wrongdoing, creating a broader institutional barrier against corruption that extends well beyond Trump himself. Politically, the fallout appears severe, with reports indicating that support within his own party has eroded rapidly. Following the release of the Deutsche Bank records, dozens of Republican senators are now said to be backing efforts tied to the 25th Amendment, and within hours of the documents becoming public, additional senators reportedly joined the growing dissent, underscoring the scale of the political damage. Even many figures who previously overlooked extreme actions or controversial conduct are now concluding that remaining tied to a president accused of Russian-linked money laundering represents political suicide in most states. According to political analysts, these senators are calculating that supporting efforts to remove Trump is increasingly seen as the only way to preserve their own careers. Reports indicate that the current push to invoke the 25th Amendment is expected to advance with broad bipartisan backing, reflecting how dramatically Trump's political standing has deteriorated. Polling cited by commentators places his approval rating at roughly 4%, an almost unheard-of figure in modern politics, suggesting near-universal public rejection and leaving him with virtually no remaining base of support. Observers describe the moment as unprecedented, noting that no sitting political leader in a democratic system has faced such sweeping political, legal, and public opposition at once. The accumulation of allegations, ranging from corruption and foreign financial entanglements to Epstein-related connections and accusations of war crimes, has created a situation in which federal investigators are reportedly preparing expansive cases, including potential RICO actions. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, legal experts explain, is designed to prosecute sustained criminal enterprises rather than isolated acts. Underscoring the scale and seriousness of the legal exposure now being discussed, supporters of applying the RICO statute argue that doing so would legally frame the Trump Organization as an alleged criminal enterprise, potentially making Trump accountable for a wide range of suspected misconduct tied to its operations, including money laundering, fraud, obstruction of justice, and claims involving Epstein-linked activities. Legal analysts note that, when combined with separate allegations related to foreign policy decisions, such as accusations connected to operations in Venezuela, Trump could face extraordinarily severe legal exposure if prosecutors were to pursue such cases, including the possibility of life imprisonment. At the same time, Washington, D.C. has become the focal point of massive unrest, with reports describing tens of thousands of protesters flooding the streets in what some observers are calling the largest demonstrations in U.S. history, overwhelming law enforcement, and deepening what constitutional scholars describe as an escalating crisis. Accounts from the ground describe blocked streets, clashes with police, sporadic fires, and tragic loss of life, while officials struggle to respond amid legal and jurisdictional constraints. The unrest reflects years of pent-up public anger and a widespread demand for accountability, with demonstrators vowing to remain until they see concrete consequences. Internationally, commentators warn that the turmoil has rattled global confidence in U.S. stability, with market volatility intensifying as investors react to uncertainty about America's political future. Analysts point to sharp market declines, massive losses in household wealth and retirement accounts, and fears that the economic damage from the crisis could take years to repair, with consequences continuing to compound as the situation remains unresolved. The Supreme Court's denial has far-reaching implications, particularly when viewed alongside the newly unsealed Deutsche Bank records and the broader constitutional stakes for American democracy. According to legal analysts, Trump's legal exposure is expanding rapidly, with investigators examining potential charges that include alleged money laundering, possible RICO violations, accusations tied to foreign policy actions, and renewed scrutiny of his connections to Jeffrey Epstein. The Deutsche Bank documents are said to outline decades of questionable financial activity, prompting reports that the Department of Justice is preparing indictments based on what prosecutors view as a substantial evidentiary record. While no outcome has been formally determined, commentators argue that the trajectory of the investigations now points towards serious criminal jeopardy rather than abstract legal risk. Central to that scrutiny is a reported $30 million payment routed through a shell company allegedly linked to Epstein, a transfer whose timing reportedly coincides with Epstein's flights on the Lolita Express. Analysts reviewing the records say this alignment suggests more than a casual social relationship and raises troubling questions about whether a concealed financial partnership existed. Although the documents do not specify the purpose of the payment, investigators are reportedly focused on uncovering its destination and intent, particularly in light of Epstein's known criminal history, making this financial trail one of the most consequential threads in the unfolding investigation. Another major revelation centers on Russian money reportedly flowing through Trump's accounts. According to Deutsche Bank compliance documents cited by investigators, his accounts were flagged as conduits for potential money laundering involving Russian oligarchs, with more than $2.5 billion in loans identified as suspicious. Analysts point to apparent negligence by bank officials and warnings from the FBI that reportedly went unheeded, fueling concerns that a significant portion of Trump's financial empire may have relied on illicit funds. Meanwhile, the political landscape is shifting dramatically. Reports indicate that 31 Republican senators support invoking the 25th Amendment, and with Trump's approval rating at roughly 4%, Vice President Vance is expected to be sworn in later today, signaling a historic transition of power. The fallout has also taken a severe human and economic toll, with protests drawing around 150,000 people, more than a dozen reported deaths, a 30% drop in the stock market wiping out trillions in wealth, and federal job losses numbering in the hundreds of thousands, leaving government operations strained. Taken together, analysts argue these events are exposing a different reality behind Trump's public persona. Allegations suggest he may have engaged in decades-long financial dealings with Russia, facilitated payments to Jeffrey Epstein through shell companies, and prioritized personal gain over legal and ethical obligations. Observers note that this unfolding crisis has tested American institutions and accountability mechanisms, illustrating the stark consequences when alleged misconduct intersects with national power. It increasingly feels like long-standing questions about Donald Trump's conduct are being brought into sharper public view, with critics comparing the controversy to historical scandals like Teapot Dome, but arguing the current situation is broader in scope. While Teapot Dome centered on corruption over oil leases, the debates today involve intense scrutiny of Trump's financial dealings, long-standing investigations into his businesses, and legal challenges over access to his records, including those involving Deutsche Bank and congressional subpoenas for financial data. Courts have ruled that congressional subpoenas for presidential financial records can proceed, and Trump's claims of immunity from such oversight have been a major legal battleground in cases shaping the limits of presidential power and accountability. At the same time, various civil and criminal investigations continue into Trump-related organizations and actions, including long-running probes in New York and federal challenges tied to his attempts to overturn the 2020 election results, matters that have already resulted in significant legal consequences and judicial decisions about presidential immunity and executive authority. While some commentators raise dramatic characterizations of alleged misconduct ranging from financial impropriety to broader political critiques, what is certain is that these disputes are intensifying scrutiny of presidential conduct, democratic institutions, and the rule of law, and they are unfolding in public forums, court filings, and legislative debates that are shaping the political and legal landscape in real time. Amid ongoing legal battles and intense public scrutiny, Trump faces mounting questions about his financial dealings and the oversight of his business operations. Investigations, court rulings, and unsealed documents, including those from Deutsche Bank, have intensified the focus on his finances, with prosecutors and civil authorities examining a range of potential issues. While no convictions have been issued, legal analysts note that the outcomes of these proceedings could carry significant consequences for him personally and politically. Trump has largely remained out of the public spotlight during these developments, a marked contrast to his usual media presence, and commentators have noted the growing pressure from courts, lawmakers, and regulatory agencies. The broader political and legal landscape remains tense, with debates about presidential accountability, the scope of executive privilege, and institutional checks on power dominating the conversation. These developments underscore the seriousness of the scrutiny surrounding Trump, highlighting both the challenges of enforcing accountability at the highest level and the enduring importance of democratic oversight. In the end, Donald Trump, who once aspired to be the most powerful person in the world, now faces unprecedented scrutiny over his financial dealings and legal decisions. Investigations and court rulings, including those involving Deutsche Bank records, have brought decades of his business practices into public view, revealing complex transactions, questionable loans, and ties to high-profile figures. While no convictions have been issued, prosecutors and civil authorities are pursuing legal avenues that could carry serious consequences. The Supreme Court has weighed in on key questions of presidential oversight, and Congress continues to examine records and compliance issues, underscoring the enduring checks and balances in American democracy. Public attention remains intense, and debates over accountability, transparency, and the limits of executive power dominate the national conversation. Reflecting on these developments, it is clear that the nation is grappling with one of the most challenging tests of democratic oversight in modern history, highlighting both the resilience of American institutions and the stakes of holding leaders accountable.